Welcome to this Fair Museum Jobs panel all about giving and getting good application feedback. This panel is all about how to give good feedback to candidates that avoids common pitfalls and provides real practical advice, as well as how to respond to feedback as a candidate so that you can build your CV and improve future applications. So I'm Catriona Wilson, I'm head of the Petrie collection at UCL, and I'm also a committee member of Fair Museum Jobs. Our panel today is Mark Macleod, who's a freelancer, Laura Southall, who's head of learning at the Science Museum, and Vicky Barlow, who is museum director for Maidstone Borough Council. So as an exercise with everyone's cameras off, I would like to invite you to literally or figuratively raise your hand if you've ever been told it's not possible to have feedback from an application. So I'm imagining there's probably a few hands raised. I also, I'll do the same. I also wonder if you've ever been told if it's not possible to have feedback from an interview. So those raised hands are why we're here. That's clearly not acceptable, and that's something that we as Fair Museum Jobs believe that the sector needs to improve. So this is a subject really close to my heart, as I've spent a lot of time working on my own interview feedback and application feedback practice, and our panel feels exactly the same. So I thought I would start today with a light question with a darker undertone, which is, what is the worst or the most ridiculous interview feedback that you've been given or seen given to somebody else? And I'll start with Mark, if that's okay. You're the first one on my list.
Thank you, and hello everybody who's come along to this. I mean, I personally think that the worst and most ridiculous is when they say the other candidate was better than you. I think that's not feedback. That may be fact, but it's not going to do anything to help you. So feedback to me means giving you some information as to why you weren't selected, but some information that you're able to then work on and grow yourself with.
Thank you. I would completely agree. I'll move on to Laura.
Yes, I've had some varied bits of feedback from many interviews in many organisations. I think probably one of the worst was a very long email, which is kind of, the opposite of what we were saying, and I guess I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but it was a very long email, went into a lot of detail, and it felt like a bit of a tirade of sort of why I wasn't good enough. So that's, I guess, the other way. And I remember one of the lines were, but don't worry, I have definitely given much worse interviews than you did on this occasion. And I just thought, well, that's very kind, thank you. And I think that I certainly, when I try and give feedback, I think if you want to give people some detailed feedback, and if someone is asking for detailed feedback, then absolutely great. But I think it's probably nice to do that on the phone or in person if you can. I think it's very difficult to sort of receive an email like that when you've just sort of said, yes, I would like some feedback, and it's quite a lot. And the second, I totally agree with Mark about it needs to be more specific. Just saying that someone else was a bit better is really hard to hear and not helpful. Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it's very little in it, but I think you should be giving the time and have made the notes in the interview to give something a little bit more constructive.
Thank you. And then lastly, Vicky.
Yeah, I think again it's the useless feedback that isn't great. I was once told you just weren't us. That's many years ago now. Absolutely no use to me or anyone else, frankly. It's like, in what way? So yeah, and I think as an interviewer, it can be hard if you've seen a lot of people, and sometimes there are 2 or 3 people that you could appoint, but you do need to be very clear about why one person got it and someone else didn't, and where that other person could have made up the difference.
Thank you.
Be specific, but be kind.
I think kindness is a bit of a theme of this conference so far. It's definitely a personal cause of mine. So that's really helpful that the 3 of you have touched on what I was going to ask next, which is about what good feedback looks like and how you put good feedback into practice personally. If you want to whoever wants to leap in is welcome to. Or I can pick someone.
We're all being very polite, aren't we? I'll go because silence is just awkward. So I think for me, when I look for feedback, what I don't do is look for it straight away, particularly if it's a job that I was really hoping to get or really wanted, because I know that when I'm feeling emotional like that, I'm not going to take the feedback in the right mode. So I usually give it a few days, calm down and think about, yeah, okay, what do I think was lacking? And then look for feedback. And usually I don't think I've been terribly surprised by the feedback. I don't think I've ever thought, well, that's terribly unfair. Sorry, somebody's trying to phone me. So I think just be in a place to receive that feedback. And then you've got a chance to think about any questions that you might have about what happened. And for me, that's always the best, is if I ask a question and somebody then is more prepared to detail and often will, say, well, perhaps you could try X, Y, or Z.
Thank you. I think, Mark, you had your hand up as well. You want to go?
Yeah, so what were you asking, Catriona? Sorry.
Well, it's all right. I was asking what good feedback looks like and what you think is good feedback to help to give a candidate. So what would you, how would you give good feedback?
Yeah, I always try and give it as, maybe contradict Vicky a little bit, I always try and give it as quickly as possible to give the feedback to them, so that they're not left for 2 days, sometimes 3 weeks, wondering if they're getting the job. I think that's quite important because the stress levels and adrenaline is not pleasant for that amount of time. But giving it back quickly, and as Laura mentioned, through your notes. So you've been writing furiously during the interview, which often can put the candidate at under more pressure, because when they see you writing furiously down, so we always try and put them at ease at the start, saying we're all going to be writing down lots of things, but it's to your benefit because it's helping us understand who you are and what your experience is and what you wish to convey to us. So I think all of those elements go into giving good feedback at the end of the day, and to me, giving it as quickly as possible, as specifically as possible, and as in as much helpful way as possible as well. It's good to be kind, but actually, if they weren't good, you do have to be constructively critical. However, I always try and add it in with some high points as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if we're talking about what good feedback looks like, I think I've started to, and only in the last few years, and this, I'm just talking at the moment about feedback from an interview. So if someone has come to interview with me, I will let them know via email that they're not successful, but I will say that I can give feedback to them either in an email, on the phone, or in person, and most people choose an email, and in that case I'll try and pick out a good 3 or 4 points from the interview. One of those points will usually, at least one will be a good thing, like, this was really good, so please always continue to do this in your future interviews. And the other things will be constructive things that they might like to think about next time, and invariably quite a lot of the things are the same for a lot of the candidates. So it'll be like, be very specific when you're giving an answer. So, lots of people, and I've done this so many times, you waffle on about, the principles of managing someone rather than just saying, I've managed this person, I did this, this, and this. So that's always a bit of feedback that is usually common across the board. But as I mentioned earlier, taking those notes, and I have now started taking notes, not just writing down what the candidate's saying, but writing down actually what I'm thinking. So for instance, if someone's waffling on, I write down, they need an example here, and that's really, really useful, so that when I go back across those notes and I'm talking through with that person, or I'm pulling out bits for that email, I can actually remember, oh yeah, I thought that thing at that point. And sometimes it's really, really specific things. And I guess going back to the email, phone, or in-person thing, I always used to choose email, but I now offer to do it on the phone, because someone offered to do that for me once, and I found it incredibly helpful. I didn't really want to do it, because I said, you know, I'd like some feedback, expecting an email. She said, oh yeah, I'll call you tomorrow at 11. And I was like, yeah, don't really want to do that, but thought, no, that's probably a good thing. I maybe need to hear some home truths. And that was a really, really constructive conversation, because I got the chance then to ask her some questions that I'd not really asked anyone before. I remember really specifically, I was always getting a question about how do you prioritize your work? You know, that classic one of, you know, and I was like, I don't know how to answer this, because, you know, when you're in a busy period, you just get it done, don't you? And you just kind of want to sit there in the interview and say, I just get it done, you know. And, you know, I asked her specifically, you know, what is the right answer there? Tell me, you know, what did you want to hear? And she said, yeah, the answer is obviously just get it done, but, you know, you want to talk about things like to-do lists and deadlines and Gantt's communication skill. And ever since that, I've got that question in an interview, and I thought, I know the answer here, boom. And I would not have been able to do that unless that person had been really kind and let me have sort of half an hour of her time to let me grill her on what the right answers were. So now I always offer to do it on the phone, but totally understand if people don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's really admirable. I think as a candidate, I would find it extremely nerve-wracking picking up the phone for that call. So it sounds like it would be really worth my while. And I haven't offered that myself, but it's something that I think I should do based on the way you describe it. So that sounds really excellent. Thank you. And we just had a couple of questions in the chat. One that sort of follows on from that, which I thought I might ask now anyway, which is, do you think it's okay to offer feedback from an interview in which you were offered the job? This person says, I have perpetual imposter syndrome, snap, and would find it helpful to combat this, but don't want to come across as arrogant.
Yeah, sorry to just jump in. I have now started to offer this as well. Again, only in the last few months, really. But yeah, I've reflected on that and thought, you know, when I've got the job and when I've not got the job, I get the feedback from when I've not got the job, but thought, actually, what did I actually do really well in that one that I'd got the job? So I now do offer people, if they want to have a quick sort of half an hour with me. Sometimes it's not that constructive, because if someone's absolutely smashed it and done a really good job, there's nothing you can say other than that was brilliant, carry on. Specifically, and I do try, again, when I'm making those notes of someone that is smashing it, I do try and think, are there little points here that could have been better, and what specifically are they? It's a difficult thing. I've started to approach interviewing people slightly differently in the last few years. And I think, firstly, I would just note down what people were saying, but now I do try and use my brain a bit more about sort of trying to analyze what's right or wrong about what people are saying, and writing that down takes a bit more effort, and I have found it's more difficult on Zoom because you're trying to type and stuff, but yeah, I think definitely ask for an interview if you get it. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Go for it, Mark.
I mean, I think absolutely agree with Laura, and the bigger picture here is it's for the benefit of the sector. If you are successful in getting a job and you learn why you're successful, you are then going to pass that knowledge on to other people. And your colleague is going to become more trusted with you if you're coming to a new organisation. It's a great way of forming a bond, because it's in a positive light. You know, if you're on a phone app and it says, do you want to rate this app now? They don't do it in a bad point in the app's experience. They do it while you're feeling good, while you're feeling positive, because that builds brand recognition and brand trust. It's the same as individuals. So if you remember, this is the whole point of doing feedback. And if you look online about why do people not give feedback, they're scared of being sued, they're scared of being discriminatory. If you're scared of being discriminatory, maybe you're a discriminatory company. So perhaps you need to be more open about why feedback is being given and the benefits that it brings to the organisation and to the staff who are there.
I think also, just to jump in, and if Oksana doesn't mind, I want to just read out what she's written, which is, the thing I find challenging about phone call feedback is that for a person of colour, it's where you get feedback filled with microaggressions because they wouldn't put it on paper, which is a devastating experience to have, and it reflects what you just said, Mark. I think if people are afraid of what they do, they need to look at their own practice and figure out what they're doing wrong to be afraid of what they might say. So Yes. Vicky, did you want to respond to that too? If not, I'll move on. I don't mind.
No, I think the other two have covered it quite well. I was just looking as well. Hannah had a question about, is it okay to ask for feedback on unsuccessful applications that didn't even go to interview? And I think that, yes, of course it is. Ring up, and especially if you're expecting an interview, because those are going to be the most useful ones. You know, if you think you deserved an interview and you didn't get one, find out why you didn't get one, definitely.
Yes, and I was going to ask the panel a bit later, but I'll ask it now. Is it possible, as somebody doing feedback, to give feedback on every application? Can you ever give feedback to everybody? Can you ever offer that? In museums, we get hundreds of applicants to many roles. It's like that. And I know I've definitely had numerous applications of more than 200 candidates, for example. So what do you think? Is it ever possible to offer that feedback?
Yeah, and in the chat, Sarah Gore has said that she offers it to, she's got hundreds of unlucky applicants. I think it's vitally important, and there's absolutely no reason why not. Again, I don't like this opinion of, oh, we had 200 applicants, so we can't offer any feedback. Technology is there to help. If you think about each candidate, I mean, maybe the chat can tell us, how long do you spend on an application form? The last one you sent in, how much time did you spend on it? And you extrapolate that out, it's really offensive for organisations not to give a response. And, you know, in the job application, they'll say, well, we're not going to respond to anyone. If you don't hear by such and such a date, you've not been successful. That's an appropriate approach to take. Because technology is there. You're making decisions. As you read the application, you're making a decision. And if that decision is a 4 for me and it's a 5 for Vicky, you tell me it's a 4 and you tell me why it's below what a 5 should be. You set the job spec up properly. I think that's also what Sarah says. And therefore it makes it easier to give the feedback out. So, you know, it's a systematic improvement can be made, but technology is there to help. There's no point in thinking you do all this manually. That would be a really poor use of management time. You do the technology, you make the decisions, and you have the technology pump it out for you.
Yes, Vicky. Yeah.
Absolutely. We obviously, my experience is largely in local government, where this kind of thing is pretty standard. So we have to make at least a note when we're doing scoring about why people haven't been successful. They're always told if they're not successful in either gaining an interview or getting the job, rather. And so people get a level of feedback. So if they rang in and said, why didn't I get an interview? HR would be able to tell them one thing. And if they needed more detail, then we would do that personally. So yeah, you have to, you know, if somebody comes back later and needs you to justify why they didn't get an interview and didn't get the job, then you have to be able to justify that later. So why not just tell them at the start?
Thank you. Yes. I've just seen a question from Lucy. Hello, Lucy. I work with Lucy. She's brilliant. She says, sometimes when we get hundreds of applications, there are some that read as cut and paste or done very quickly, missing things out. Is that okay to give us feedback?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely okay to give us feedback. I'd say that, yeah, the majority, you know, say if you're having, you know, I've been there and I've got 200 applications for something, and I'd say a very high percentage of those were not good enough because, yeah, just wasn't a good application. You know, some job applications are sort of ordered in a way where you see people's experience first, and you see someone's experience and you think, oh, this will be good, and then you might get to that personal statement bit, and yeah, it's a copy and paste. There's accidentally you know, another organization's name in there, you know, there's another job to, you know, we've all done it. I've definitely done it. You know, it's an easy mistake to make, and that is not always, you know, if it's otherwise an amazing application, of course I wouldn't discount it. You know, as I say, everyone makes mistakes, but quite a lot of the time it's really short. It's just a really short thing, and that's not what we're looking for. It's not even enough to assess whether, you know, I could offer that person an interview, and that's, I think, fair feedback.
started being on interview panels in the 1990s, and with the sort of benefit system that you had then, you used to get a lot of people who were forced to apply for so many jobs a week. And a lot of them, they'd fill in the first part and you just didn't have a statement, you had no information, and that's fine, you just record that as didn't supply any information. If somebody then rings you back and says, hang on, I wrote 24 pages, what's gone wrong, then that's a different matter. But museums do seem to attract people who, I don't, maybe all sectors do, but attract people who have no relevant experience and haven't done anything that their application would make them suitable for. And especially when we have jobs like collections manager, which means an awful lot of different things in different industries. So sometimes the only answer is they did not give us information that proved they could do the job, and that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed earlier on, I just wanted to mention this, somebody mentioned quite early on that there was some feedback from an interview at the Petrie that was excellent. I just wanted to say that won't have been me, so I can't take that credit. I've only been here since last August. I've not done any interviews at the Petrie yet, so I will pass that on to whoever did that, and I'm really glad that my colleagues, and not surprised that they gave good feedback, but that's not me, so please don't let me take that credit. So I will move on a little bit to the receiving end. So candidates, what advice would you give to candidates receiving feedback, and how can they use this information to best effect?
I'm thinking about Laura's feedback, and I take on board the person in the chat who had a bad experience. But if you are able to do the telephone, you are able to then put them on the spot. I can't speak to someone getting microaggressions against them, but if they are saying to me, you didn't give enough detail in your answer, I can say, well, why? Or what situation? Or you didn't mention what project management was. Okay, so you wanted me to break down and explain how I do project management. Thank you, that's really helpful. I can build on that. So if you're the candidate getting the feedback, it is hard to listen, but I would do it with a pen and paper and just listen to the keywords that they're saying. Perhaps you work front of house, you've had customers complain to you in the past. How do you get to the bottom of that complaint? Try and use those skills, asking this employer, well, why did you think that was the case? And what did I do wrong? How could I improve myself? The whole point of feedback is to improve you as an individual, not that organization. So if they say things like you wouldn't fit into the organization, or you didn't have enough experience, the other person had more experience, how many years experience were you looking for? How many hours of experience were you looking for? So you take that advantage if you have it. It's terrifying, of course it is, but the second time you do it, it's much easier than the first time, and so on. And that's, you get taught about doing crucial conversations and leadership courses, or perhaps if you're a counsellor or involved in social justice. These are all skills that you can bring to that kind of conversation. So I would always encourage you to do that if you can for the feedback.
Yeah, I was going to say also the importance of, kind of goes against what I said earlier, but taking some things with a pinch of salt. I think Louise put in the chat about, someone said that she was too reserved or something. I've had feedback said I'm too enthusiastic, too enthusiastic, and I can't do much about that. And sometimes I think there's a duty on people giving the feedback to be a little bit careful about that, to keep it constructive, as I said before, because there was a period when I was unemployed and I was doing loads and loads of interviews, one a week, and I was getting really, really up in my head about what I was doing wrong, and got some really good, useful, constructive bits of feedback along the way, but also did get some feedback on parts of me that I felt like I couldn't change and didn't want to change. I didn't want to be less enthusiastic in an interview. I couldn't change the fact that I didn't have as much experience as other candidates. And I think when you get that feedback, I think really, don't take it all as, yes, I have to change that quickly. I must be different, because I think that can be detrimental to your, and after a couple of feedback sessions, I did have some really rubbish interviews because I just overthought it completely, and I was trying to be a completely different person. And sometimes, and this is not constructive feedback, but just sometimes that job isn't right for you. It's frustrating to hear that you wouldn't be a good fit in the team, but sometimes that is the case, and you've got to take that on board as well. If someone's saying that you're too enthusiastic, that doesn't mean you're going to be too enthusiastic for the next person. For the next person, you might be just the right level of enthusiastic. So I think taking it all with a pinch of salt is important as well. Don't take every piece of feedback that they give you as the thing that you must work on, because that's unrealistic. Also,
while you were talking, I was thinking about how most of those comments reflect on the nature and the personalities of the people giving the feedback. So maybe reflect on why they might have been motivated to say that to you. And there's actually a really great comment from a question from Oksana as well, saying, how often do interview panelists get feedback about how they conduct themselves? Which I think is really interesting, because the answer for me personally is I have never had feedback about how I conduct myself in myself. I'm not more than one person in interview. So I'd be interested to know your experiences. Maybe Vicky, if you think.
No, I've never had that, and it would be useful. I mean, in the old days, you would have an HR person sit in on interviews, and sometimes they used to give a bit of feedback. But these days, it's usually just a couple of colleagues. And no, I haven't. And I do think that actually feeding back with each other would be useful as well. That I've been on interview with panels with either senior or junior colleagues where I've thought, ouch, or we didn't ask that question very clearly. And sometimes that happens. You get every single candidate who clearly doesn't understand a question. Then you have to think, we got that question wrong. But it would be useful, if a little terrifying.
Yeah, I agree. I think it all shouldn't be one way. I've had candidates say, after I have given them a phone call, say to me, thank you so much, that was really helpful, because I'm going for a job tomorrow and I needed to hear that. So had that feedback, absolutely. But I doubt anyone would get in touch with me if I'd done a terrible job at giving them feedback. So yeah, I agree that it should get into that recruitment process, folded into it. Yeah.
I have interviewed for, I was invited to sit on panels for the local council and some other organisations, and that was enlightening in as much as you get to see what their perhaps systemic problems are, or their style, or their the way that they approach their questions. And maybe that's another way that some organisations could mix it up a little bit. I was lucky enough to work at a university, so we could always ask for someone from the business school to come in and help us with an interview, and that would allow us to, speak to each other about our styles and things as well. And as far as the interviewee goes, it is tricky going to an interview. It would be really hard to then phone them back and say, well, I didn't like the style that you did that. I think you do, as you go on your career, you become more confident and you become more aware of the problems and the mistakes. But if you're quite new to the sector, then perhaps you don't realise, maybe sometimes people take advantage by asking you to do a 50-minute presentation on how to engage a community that they've not engaged with yet. Because we never know what happens to those. We don't trademark it. We don't insist on being paid for those opportunities. But it's worth a lot in the sector. So I think perhaps organisations could, start to introduce some other people to the panels to be a little bit more honest about how it's being done, so we don't become too cliquey and silo thinking. If you're the same person in that organisation for 10 years, maybe you've never thought to ask a question about the latest ideas in museum thinking because you're not comfortable talking about them.
Yeah, I would agree. And also I wonder about thinking about candidates. You talked about as you get later on in your career, you build up that thicker skin, or maybe you feel more established and therefore more secure. But if you're coming to the sector quite early on in your career, then giving a panel feedback on things that you think were not so great would feel like quite a brave thing to do. And I'm thinking with Fair Museum Jobs have done various surveys about people's experiences in careers, and one of the things that we asked people about was poor interview experiences, and there were some really incredible things in there. And I think as a candidate, I would have found it difficult to say to people, do you know what, you shouldn't have had 15 people on that panel, or you should have not changed the time 8 times on the day. Or and Louise's comment here about being kept waiting for 45 minutes, for example, and not without any real discussion. So yeah, there've been interesting examples, and yeah, I think I would find that difficult as a candidate to give that, but I think maybe it should be asked for and welcomed.
And remember, we're not criticising anyone. We're there. Everyone is doing this for the benefit of themselves. And if you're a professional, then you want to welcome constructive feedback. Otherwise, you're not being a professional, and you're not going to ever improve. And I don't like to meet people who don't want to improve.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea after, even if it's just an email sort of survey or something, you know, a bit of an opportunity after you've had an interview to feedback. Because thinking about it, my last experience was actually really, really positive, and I did feedback to my new manager that actually I really, you know, that meant a lot to me, that I was well looked after, and you know, communication was all really prompt, and you know, this person in particular in HR was a star, and please can you feed that back. But that's because I was now in the job and feeling cocky and feeling great because, you know, I've got the job. But you know, if I hadn't been offered the job, I probably wouldn't have even had the opportunity to do that. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good idea.
Yes, me too. And actually, Louise's next comment has prompted me to ask something I was going to say, which is, what can candidates do if an organisation refuses to give feedback? So the reason that I'm saying this is because Louise says she was told she didn't get the job after interview when I emailed after 3 weeks, and then it took 4 weeks to get feedback after threatening a subject access request. So yeah, I wondered what you would recommend people do if an organisation turns it down outright.
As with any, and I think I heard it on the panel earlier this week, you don't have to accept any jobs that you're given. I know we're desperate for work and it's important to have a job, but if the organisation is a terrible place to work, why would you want to work there? And if it takes them 4 weeks for their admin to sort themselves out, is that a place, unless you're going to go in there and be the person who's going to sort that admin out for them, then that gives you an exciting opportunity. But I think it's that kind of approach of you're interviewing them while you're being interviewed. So there's nothing wrong with being given feedback. I've just gone through a government application process, and it's the best application process that I've ever had. I didn't get the position I asked for, but I'm now on a rota that if a position comes up, because I've been assessed as being suitable for a certain role, and if a role comes up, I'll be offered that role. Incredible. I don't have to do another application form. It's there until May for 6 or 7 months. They did send out a questionnaire. How was the experience? Everything was done blind. There was no personal characteristics on any of the application form. We have a lot to learn from such a system. And I think it's that kind of sensible thinking outside of our sector could go a long way to help and make sure that we have more diverse candidates, or we have better candidates, we have better applications, we have less applications because it's more clear, specific job description. We're not copying and pasting. Sorry, I'm ranting. Pass the buck. Vicky, you have something to say.
Not ranting at all. I agree. We don't see people's personal information, but we do see names. And while we don't ask people's age anymore, we do ask, I think we still ask about their academic qualifications. And it means that you can sort of judge those things. And I don't think they're necessary. They make no difference. And so I would be quite happy not to see them, actually. And I think that the worst thing, of course, is, we are not a big industry. So when you're assessing an application or getting ready for interview, there is bound to be at least one person there that you either know slightly, or you know of, or you may have heard stuff about, and that's always tricky. So actually, I think that a small survey after they've had their interview is great. And actually, I think we might look at introducing that one. I don't think that's difficult. And definitely blind applications.
I think it's a tricky one if you're being refused feedback or they're just not getting back to you. I've definitely been in that situation, where, you know, I've emailed once, twice, 3 times, like, please, you know, I've come to a different city, I've sat in front of a huge panel where I was only expecting 2 people and actually it was 7, and you still can't give me some feedback. You know, I have got a little bit shirty with people, but still no reply. And I will be taking Louise's advice on that in the future if I don't get feedback. I think you know, to go back to what we were talking about earlier a little bit about, you know, giving feedback about applications, because that's come up again in the chat. And I guess I was sitting here slightly awkwardly because I'm really aware that in previous, and if anyone here has applied for a job where it was me, I am aware that I have not given feedback on applications all of the time. And I think that's not right. You know, I don't have a good excuse for doing that, and I would love to be able to do it. I think it totally depends on the sort of organisation that you're in. If you are in sort of a big national museum, there might be some HR processes that means that the recruitment manager, you know, is just not allowed to do that. That's just the policies. And I think that fair museum jobs, and I think we can all be really good voices in trying to change those policies, because they're not good policies. But I think if you work in a smaller organisation where sometimes those applications do come straight to you because there maybe isn't an HR person or there isn't a policy about that thing, I think you do have to, and I have been guilty of not doing this in the past, I think you do have to carve out some time to be able to give some feedback to applications. Absolutely.
Yeah, so much of it, a thread running as an undercurrent in this is really just, if you're doing recruitment, you have to plan it properly, and you're not just interviewing to get somebody into a role who can do the project that you need to get done. It's about planning the recruitment as a project in itself and doing it appropriately, so you do have that time. And so something that I've done for where I've been in an organisation where I wouldn't normally be the one sending the feedback, for applications who didn't get an interview, I've sent a kind of summary of the typical mistakes or the things that were typically missed off, and then HR have sent that out for me on my behalf, and offered to talk to anybody in more detail about how we mark applications if they want. And I've had people take me up on that before. I do remember, at least a couple of years ago, talking to somebody on Twitter. I don't know if you're in this room right now. If you are, then you're kind of amazing. Telling me that they always planned to give feedback for every single application, every time. And I remember at the time saying, yes, you know, 200 applications, really hard, isn't it hard? And she said, yes, it is. And we plan the time and we do it because it's an important commitment, because these people are our colleagues now or in the future, and we want them to be in the sector because we need them in the sector. So yeah, I think that's really good. Somebody has asked in the chat about, do people on interview panels feel awkward if they're interviewing someone they've already interviewed for a different job for which the person was unsuccessful? And she said, I've been interviewed by the same person twice and got the second job, but it was very awkward. Does anyone want to have a go at that one?
I don't see why it should be awkward, frankly. There are times when, if you've got a couple of jobs advertised, you get people who will apply for 2 very diverse jobs. But we don't carry that across. They are assessed individually. So we know that when people are looking for jobs, there are various jobs that they probably could do. So, you were awkward, not the panel.
Yeah, she's just Catherine's added saying that she was awkward, not the panel. So I've done that. I've been in that position too, personally. So yeah, I know how weird it can be.
Yeah, no, it is weird. And I think you're bound to want to use some of the same examples as well. So as long as you're consistent, yeah, don't be awkward. We want good candidates for every single job application. And if you're not the right candidate for one job, you're you may well be the right candidate for the next job. So yeah, absolutely. One of the things I would say to everyone who's thinking about applying for a job is, if you think you can do it, go for it. I'm not suggesting that you deliberately waste anyone's time, but frankly, the job of the panel is to find the best person to do that job and not for you to second guess it. So if there are 2 jobs in one organisation, apply for them both.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to Catherine's point, I think, I don't know if you got feedback from that first time that they interviewed you, but in theory, if they gave you some really good constructive feedback that first time, then you should be absolutely smashing it the second time, in theory. It goes back to that. It goes back to that feedback. But I don't think that's awkward at all. And I'd absolutely echo what Vicky was saying. If you think you can do it, you have to put that to the side. The awkwardness and that looks a bit weird. Just don't worry about it. I have been for so many job interviews in so many places, and if people are counting that against me, then that's their problem, not mine. I think every interview experience is I was going to say a good one. No, that's not true. Every interview experience is useful. You meet people, you put yourself in front of people, and you learn something from each time. And hopefully, if someone's giving you good feedback every time, you actually do learn something really constructive each time. And what Vicky was saying about the examples, absolutely fine to use the same examples. I think often I find in interviews, it doesn't really matter what the examples are, as long as you're explaining them properly and saying the right things. So no, gosh, don't worry that people have heard that before. Like Vicky said, that's their job. It's not your problem.
I think I canvassed on Twitter and through some various places for information for this panel, and some feedback came back from people who felt awkward going for jobs within existing organisations or a place they have worked before. And you're in control of how you behave and how your feelings are. If it makes you feel awkward, try and get above that from a professional point of view. Similar, as I say, if you're front of house and you've had a really bad day yesterday, you pick yourself up and you put all that to the side to be a professional. You're representing yourself in the interview. And the other important thing to remember, if it is that people who know you, pretend you don't know them and pretend they do not know you. You must express every kind of example that you know. And if it bores them, that, as Laura says, it's their problem. Yeah. Because if you don't mention all the things required on that score sheet that they're scoring you against, that will not work. They cannot say, oh, but I saw last week they were really good at helping out a team member. They didn't say that in the interview. It's not fair to have that included. So if you get past the awkwardness and think about, oh, I don't know who they are, just imagine them wearing different masks, and it should be okay.
And just to follow on from that, just to remind, earlier on in the chat, Louise has put links to 2 other sessions coming up this week. So we've already had one about interviews. I think I say that I wasn't in this yesterday, so I can't remember, but I think it was yesterday. But we also have another session about applications and covering letters, and also how to read a job description. So one of the pieces of advice that I try to give for any member of staff is to try to be on an interview panel, so learn how to do that. Join an interview panel with people that already know how to work in interview panels and how to give good feedback, and see how it functions, and then you'll be able to see how to write a good application as an alternative, because you can see what people are looking for. That's an aside. Lucy has asked, do you ever give out interview questions in advance for paid positions? We've started to do this for volunteer interviews, and it's been well appreciated. So we're straying away from feedback, but I think it's an important question.
Yeah, we did talk about this in the doing a good interview, doing interviews well. Can't remember what we called that Monday. Yeah, we did talk about that, and I think we all on the panel sort of said that's somewhere that we would like to get to. I think going back to what Vicky said, we want people to do well in an interview, and sometimes giving people questions in advance is the way to do that. I said in that panel that I wasn't sure if that would be possible, but something that definitely is already happening is in that application process being a bit more specific about what you want, because seeing those big blank boxes of like, write your personal statement here, so unhelpful. And you know, some organizations have now started to say we want 500 words on this, 500 words on that, 500 words on this. So I think there's probably a middle ground between telling someone these are going to be the questions, prepare these questions, and sort of maybe there's a middle ground there of like the themes of the questions will be this, so please prepare this. I think that might be somewhere that we could get to soon, I hope anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've experienced through competencies. So your competencies for your staff and HR should be available to staff, and you can ask for that up front before you go to the interview. And local authorities are very good at this, or trusts are very good at this, where they clearly say this job requires these 3 competencies is the main thing. So you work on those. And I've also recently been in an interview where they said, well, there'll be 3 other questions where it will be based on, not based on competencies, but based on your fleet of foot. So that's the more, here's a scenario, how would you deliver this from that scenario? So you couldn't prepare for that more, but your experience and your professionalism should show through in those examples. But I don't think people in museums will share questions with you, but I think they should be sharing competencies so that you do know that it's 40 minutes, 3 questions. I mean, let's not even start about why do we hire someone and pay them 20 to 40,000 pounds a year based on a 45-minute interview? Absolutely ludicrous. I'm not on those panels. There we go. Sorry, Vicky, I cut you out.
No, I was trying to talk over you. No, I completely agree. I think that in local government, again, one of the good practices is that when you've got the person spec and the job spec, you will see it says, how will this be tested? And it's either by application or interview. And if it's only on the application, don't start trying to run through it for your interview. Concentrate on the ones that says you will be asked about these at interview. It won't give you the exact question. I think the more interviews you do, you tend to get a feel for what those questions are going to be. And for God's sake, practice the one on equalities. You know, it always comes up, especially if you're applying for a local government. There are set questions we have to ask. So, yeah. But read the documentation properly. The clues are probably in there.
Yeah, I think that would probably be something that I give as feedback quite a lot. Yeah, some of these questions are not, not unexpected. I would say, your answer for why you wanted this job was a little bit weak. And I would have liked you to have thought about that before you got here. And I think that's, in my view, constructive feedback. And obviously I'm giving it in a very constructive, nice way. But I think that is a theme of feedback that I give quite a lot. That the questions, some questions are curveballs, and that's absolutely fine. Some questions are a little bit you can't prepare for, but at a certain level, certainly, you should always be preparing that. Why do you want the job? Give me an example of a particular project or that sort of thing. So I think that is constructive feedback that I give quite a lot, is especially that why do you want the job question. Sometimes people just totally forget to think about that because they're just so focused on all the other bits of the job description, and so I often give that as a bit of feedback. And I often give the feedback also of have a look and have a think about what people are doing externally, because that is often a question that may not be obvious that's going to come up in the job description, and it might not be a question specifically that you get asked, but it's something that you can bring into other answers. What you've seen elsewhere, how you've put that into practice in your work, or things that you've seen that you would like to put into practice in that job. That's a piece of constructive feedback that I give quite a lot, because sometimes people can get really sort of just involved in telling me about a project that they've done, and actually sometimes you want to see that wider wider picture.
Thank you. We've got another kind of 5 minutes or so before the end. So if anyone attending today would like to share or ask any more questions, we do still have time. One thing that I've been wondering about while we've been talking is if you're the person giving the feedback and there's not much between two candidates, or even regardless whether there's gulfs between candidates, how do you work on addressing your own personal unconscious biases? How do you work on that? Because that's incredibly important in feedback. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask you this question in advance. So we've been doing the same in our panels. So.
I think, I mean, this is where if there is hopefully 3 on the panel, 3 is a much better number than 2. My personal approach is I was lucky enough to be I was in the children's hearings panels in Scotland, which provides really good training because you are 3 volunteers from the community who sit on a panel for young people who are in trouble or in issues or having difficulty in their lives. And you listen to them for 45 minutes, you ask questions of the social workers, and then you have to give your decision on what their next step is in their life. And you give the reasons in front of everybody, in front of the child, in front of the family, and in front of your 2 panel members. And it's not, you don't discuss it, you don't go behind closed doors, you do it there and then. And that taught me a huge amount of skills about trying to give very difficult news. Sometimes it's very positive news, but you have to give a reason behind it. And that soon got rid of, we all have biases, that's how the world is, unfortunately. But if you're aware of where your biases are or what they are, then you can start to address it. And so I was lucky enough to have really good training through that system, which I've tried to carry forward through my working life as well.
Yeah, I think training is really key on that. And it's something that we're going to, well, in my team at the moment, we're going to sort of have a refresher on, is that sort of unconscious bias training. And I think that for me, I always like to have a bit of time, sort of at least a night to think of it. You know, I very rarely will tell someone that they've definitely got a job on that day. And I think I, for my own practice, like to take a bit of time, if it's between 2 candidates, just to really think, you know, really sort of, you know, interrogate my decision on that, and imagine myself giving feedback, and yeah, trying to work out if there are any unconscious biases there, because, you know, there is that thing that people do sort of recruit in their own image, don't they? And I think we've all become so much more aware of that in the last few months, last few years. And I think for me, certainly in the last couple of, you know, interviews in the last few years, I've really tried to take some time just to really unpick why I'm making those decisions, try not to rush them. And as I say, imagine myself giving that feedback and hearing that and working out if that's fair and if that's robust, and if that's, you know, the right decision, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you can say it to somebody's face, then you have to be able to think through why it is. And actually, ironically enough, I'm in the middle of recruitment and selection training refreshment course at the moment, and it's actually a new element for our organisation is around is recognising that unconscious bias and how to deal with it. So I think putting it out there and getting people to accept that it exists is a good place to start.
Thank you. Me too. And I think actually that's going to be a good place to wrap up as well, because we haven't had any more questions and it's almost past. I wondered if with the last few minutes, if there was anything that any of you wanted to say as a final note, and if not, then if there's anything we didn't touch on that you really wanted to get across, or.
I think I was just going to say, if you have the opportunity to get feedback, get it. You know, it might be tricky, and I totally take on what Vicky said earlier about maybe needing a bit of time. You know, we've all been in that situation where it was, oh my God, that dream job, and I wanted it so much, and when you don't get it, it feels like an awful breakup and it feels terrible, and you have to have some time to get some perspective and hearing potentially something that might upset you more, you know, when you're in that state is not good. But I think I'm always a bit disappointed if I've interviewed someone and I say, I'm happy to give you feedback via email, on the phone, blah, 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 and they just don't reply. I always think, oh, that's a bit of an opportunity missed for you, because I actually wrote down some quite constructive things to tell you. And so, but also some good things to tell you as well. I think that's, I guess we didn't touch on that too much. You know, we didn't say that actually, if someone didn't get an interview, it's not because they were awful. You know, actually there was often some really, really good things that they said, and you want to tell them that that was good and that they don't need to worry about that part of their answer or that part of their experience. Or you know, like we were saying earlier, it's about sort of building a, you know, it's a resilient sector and a better sector. And you know, there are some times where I actually quite look forward to that interview where I'm giving feedback, because yes, it's a bit awkward because there are a couple of points that they could have done better, but it is an opportunity to say, look, don't worry, it wasn't rubbish. Like I wasn't sitting there head in hands thinking this was terrible. Actually, this answer was really good. That was brilliant. You know, you did really well there. Do exactly that answer next time, you know, and you kind of want to give people that opportunity. So don't shy away from feedback, because yeah, you might be getting some constructive points, but you might also be getting some points that will make you feel like, yeah, do you know what, I was nearly there, it's just not quite the right job for me, and it will help you for next time.
Thank you.
You're here.
Here, yeah. Okay, well, in which case I will wrap things up there. Thank you so much for being here, all three of you, Mark, Laura and Vicky. It's been great great to meet you, because I know Mark in real life, but Laura and Vicky I know through Twitter, so it's really nice to meet you online today. And I hope you have an excellent week. Bye everyone.
Bye, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.